Hi everyone, I'm Wes Gardner, an architect here at Nemetschek Vectorworks. And after getting my hands on Vectorworks Architect 2011 and spending some time with this great new release, I've discovered some tips and tricks that I'd like to share. Some you may already know and love from previous versions, some will be new due to a lot of very cool new functionality, and some are yet to be discovered. So let's get on with the show, as they say. I'm a fairly practical kind of guy most of the time, and I've spent some time designing as well as in the field actually building stuff. So this first tip involves laying out and dimensioning walls. So I'll just start drawing out some walls. Obviously we've been able to do this for some time, but by using this new mode of the wall tool, we can quickly and accurately draw to the face of stud, as I've defined the stud gallery to be the core. This is a fairly typical condition, but in previous versions you needed to do a bit of math to figure out where an offset within the wall would be. Well, not anymore. We can just use the core component control line mode to draw and then subsequently dimension to the face of the stud. While using this mode, keep in mind the U key will still toggle through the three individual offsets, as you can see here. Okay, that's good. Now we can throw in some dimensions using the good old Z key to activate the zoom loop. It's taken me a while to integrate this into my workflow, but it really does add a bit of speed and accuracy and eliminates a bunch of zooming. So I'll just complete the dimensions and there you have it. Don't forget, since we're now drawing everything in 3D, we can have a look at the walls and their dimensions in 3D. Yep, that's perfect. So now I'll switch up my files a bit and go to the beginnings of this simple building. This tip involves using the new 3D wall components as wainscoting. In case you haven't seen this, in 2011, wall components are now actual 3D elements. They can and should be classed individually and can take on textures and hatches independent of each other. This brings up all kinds of cool possibilities downstream when looking at sections. The first tip when doing this is to go to the Object Info palette and be sure the mode under the Rendering tab is set to By Component. We'll see why in a bit. So now let's look at this chair rail and wainscoting. I'll turn off the rail and other trim by going to the class settings. Now we'll look at the wainscoting. I'll enter the wall style I created for this particular wall to show how this might be done. I'll pick the component I've called wainscot, and you'll see some of this new functionality. A couple of new things have been added, like the ability to assign textures, but the tip here is offset from wall top. This is where I can define the height of each individual component within the wall. Just below that is offset from wall bottom. So theoretically, you could start to develop some banding using this new feature. Notice how I've checked off Use Class Attributes throughout the pane. This will allow me complete control over this particular element, both in design and when I get to producing drawing sheets as well. I think what's going to happen here, if you haven't started already, developing a library of wall styles will really help speed up projects, as the class structure and maybe even your most loved textures can all be embedded in the wall style. So let's just flip quickly to a sectional view. I don't want to take up too much of your time here as I've shown this in other presentations, but I just think this is really cool. When I zoom in, notice how all the components within the wall and slab are correctly shown. This is now all done automatically via the interface between wall components and slab components. Okay, another little file switch up and we'll go on to this next tip. This is a fairly basic one, but it's used throughout the design process as well as the documentation process, and that's the simple nudge command. This has been around for a while, but we've made it a bit more powerful for 2011. You can now nudge stuff in a wall and you can do it in 3D. There's two ways to set this up. The first method involves nudging by pixel, which often gets a bad rap as it's dependent on zoom percentage. But I find for designing it's a valuable tool and can give me coarse or fine adjustment. After all, at this stage, I'm designing by eye. I don't really need or want the precision of a computer, so I can just move stuff around unencumbered. The second method needs to be set up in the Vectorworks Preferences dialog, and as we'll see here, mine's set up to move or nudge things 3 inches. So there you have it. You can now nudge the entire wall or objects within the wall in any view. Okay, so here's another vignette that includes a feature that's been around for a while, but I'll start off by drawing in 3D. As you can see, there's really no reason to go to plan view to draw out some rectangles. I could use the heads-up display to input exact sizes, but right now I'm just laying out a possible floor plate. So now I'll just go up to the Add Surface command and join all these rectangles together into one polygonal shape. Next, I'll convert the polygon to an extrude using our familiar extrude command. I'll input a height value of, let's say, 40 feet. That might represent a 4-story building. Okay, so there's the extrude. Next, I'll go up to AEC and choose Space Planning, and then slide over to the first choice, Model to Floor Plan. I then get a dialog box that asks what design layers should be associated with the new model. I'll accept the 4 that are there, as well as the other defaults, and in a couple of seconds, voila! Yep, I had to work in a voila, so it might as well be here. So, once the model has been created, I'll blow away the original extruded form. What is left is, as you can see, perimeter walls on the various design layers, all nicely stacked at the correct Z heights. I think this can be a great tool for investigating some initial design ideas. The whole thing requires minimal setup and produces geometry that's now ready for the next step, either inserting floor plates and/or fenestration. Okay, switching files again. Now we'll look in this segment, we'll look at the Push-Pull tool. First, I'll just draw out some 2D rectangles. Then I'm going to duplicate them using a keyboard command. You'll not be able to see that, but trust me, either Apple D or Command D. And, by the way, I always set up my workspace to not offset duplications. Anyway, next I'll simply group these 2 rectangles, once again using a keyboard command. But now, moving down to these other 2 rectangles, I'm going to convert them to NURBS, once again using a keyboard command. But you can see it there in the Object Info palette. And once I do that, I'll simply group them just like I did for the other 2. Okay, so now I'll go and select the Push-Pull tool, and we'll see what happens. As I mouse over the 2 rectangles that are in a group, as you can see, nothing happens. But when I go over to the 2 group NURBS curves, we'll be able to perform an operation. As you can see, I'll give that object some color so you can see a little better. I can then proceed to push and pull on the grouped NURBS surfaces. Another tip here is to hold down the Option key if you need to pick the surfaces that are not up front. This allows Vectorworks to see those surfaces on the back side of your geometry. So I'll just push and pull on some of these faces. Also keep in mind, if you need to do this accurately, you can use the heads-up display to type in actual distances. Hey, this is kind of fun. Okay, moving on. Okay, so let me switch my file once again, and we'll talk about spaces. Here's a pretty cool trick involving spaces. As you can see, this plan involves a couple of apartments on a floor of a high-rise, with various colors defining the use of each space. So now let's switch to a blank plan, and I'll show you the trick. As you can see, I've set up a legend for spaces based on the colors we saw in that initial plan view. So now look at how easy it is just to drop the various colors on the appropriate spaces. The tip here to make this work is to use Option Drag and drop the space into the bounding walls, and the space just automatically adjusts. You may have to go back and grab the actual space name and adjust it such that it fits right in the middle of the space as you'd like it. Yep, I think that's really pretty cool. So now switching files again, we will look at textiles, not to be confused with textiles, that's a fabric. These are text styles. This is a new feature in 2011, and to me has already proven to be a real winner, both in 2D and 3D workflows. This first file is the master file, so what we'll need to do is go to the target file. Once we're there, we'll open its navigation palette and choose the Reference tab. Right-clicking there, we'll choose New to establish a reference. As you can see, the path will be back to the master file. You can also see the reference file there in the nav palette. Now I'll pick the two text styles from the master file there in the resource browser and choose the option to reference them into the target file. Once the text styles are in the target file, you can drag and drop them as usual onto your text blocks, like I'm doing here. So now this file has the same text style as the master. And now we'll navigate back to the master file so I can show you the tip. So now let's say I need to edit the text style I've created for the main body of any General Notes sheets. Entering the Edit dialog box, I'll need to change a few things. Perhaps the font needs to change to Arial, and the size needs to be a bit bigger. And maybe change the color to a nice green. As soon as we hit OK, you'll see the text updates to the new style. But wait, if we navigate over to the target file and choose Update in the reference section of the nav palette, the text style changes here as well. So maybe this will prove to be useful for CAD managers and other members of a design team who need to maintain and change Office standards. Okay, so we'll switch up files again, and now we'll look at some rendering techniques using Renderworks 2011. This first tip involves a procedure we used during our presentation of some of the improvements in Renderworks. The results look as if someone took a photograph of a white or museum board model. White model renderings are just one more graphic technique that can help you explore your designs and clearly show your client the general massing of his project without getting hung up with color and texture. One tip in setting this up is, first and foremost, class everything. You'll see why in a bit. So we'll use this simple file to explain some of the basic steps. First, you'll want to select a view and create a viewport. This will give you the opportunity to override your class settings in the viewport, allowing you to produce the white model look at any time. By using this viewport approach, you'll also have the opportunity to continue exploring materials and textures in your main model. So, in the class structure of the viewport, we'll need to select white as the color for all the materials. Once that's done, we'll need to go to the Object Info palette and select an HDRI background as your environmental light source. For 2011, there's now an option for plain white, which we'll use, and a good tip here is to use the new HDRIs that ship with Renderworks 2011. Another tip is to make sure ambient lighting is turned off. Now all you need to do is preview the viewport. Since Renderworks now runs under the Cinema 4D engine, it's quite a bit faster, giving you the opportunity to adjust the lighting to get just the right view you're looking for. So let me switch my file again and we'll take a look at Fluid Dynamics 101. Just kidding. Actually, we'll take a look at a couple of ways to render water. So in this sequence, first I'll create a rectangle. This one's about 150 feet by 100, just enough to show some horizon. I'll show you what I mean in a bit. Next, I'll create an extrude from the rectangle and give it a 0 thickness. Now, going over to the Render tab in the Object Info palette, I'll pick the texture Natural Water Clear from the list and apply it to the extrude. I'll then rescale it a bit. This can always be tweaked if required. Now I'll go to the Visualization tool set and choose my trusty Renderworks camera, and then I'll pick a couple of points that'll define the camera's view. I'll then ask Renderworks to show me what the camera sees, and we'll render it in OpenGL. Plain old water. Not really that interesting. But now here's the trick. Next, I've created a gradient texture, as you can see here. I'll then create another extrude and place it just below the original. And the next step is to map the gradient texture onto the second extrude. And now switching the view and rendering results in water that looks like it has a change in depth. But wait, there's more. Next we'll use this three-colored texture and go through the same process of applying it to an extrude that's just below the surface of the water, and there you have it. But now, to make it even more convincing, we can apply an HDRI background to complete the Caribbean beach scene. And, wait for it, yes! Now all you need to do is add the island and bring the cocktails. Okay, so now for our last tip in the Renderworks sequence, we'll explore some of the new shader settings. These you'll find within each texture and have been simplified and given names consistent with those in Cinema 4D. So here's the final image, and now let's find out how we got there. First, we gave each of the wine glasses and the two spheres a basic glass, clear glass texture. You can drag and drop it or do it through the resource browser. And then, to get an idea of what that looks like, I'll render it in Fast Renderworks. Now I'm going to create a new texture by duplicating the clear glass texture, and we'll call this Fresnel 1. Here we'll do some editing. We'll change the color type to Fresnel and edit the Fresnel shader, making the edge color black and the center color, since it's glass, a shade of green. Reflectivity stays the same, and for transparency, we'll change the index of refraction to, let's say, 1.3 for a start. Now I'll apply the new texture to the wine glasses and re-render. Note how there's now a subtle difference in color as the glass gets thicker. Now let's duplicate that texture once again. We'll pick a catchy name like Fresnel 2 and we'll edit it, first for color, changing it to blue, and next we'll add some bump, as this texture might simulate ice. Now we'll apply that texture to the one sphere here on the right and render it up so we can see what it looks like. Yep, that's okay. But maybe we want more color within the sphere. If we go back and edit the transparency and add a little absorption distance and color, we can get that sphere to read more like the original image. And there you have it. Okay, so that wraps up this part of the presentation. But first, I'd like to thank Luis Reese for helping me develop some of the saved views and imagery you saw here. And I also want to thank all of you for joining me for this Tips and Tricks presentation.